Returning home after years in another city, I felt like a stranger. The house of my childhood was steeped in silence, with only the gentle sunlight filtering through large windows, leaving soft golden hues on the wooden floor. How many memories did these walls hold? How many secrets? I always thought I knew them all. But the moment I crossed the threshold, something shifted, as if the silence harbored a secret ready to be unveiled. Stepping into the living room, I noticed that almost nothing had changed. My stepmother, Anna, lived here alone after my father's departure. We weren't very close. Over the years, our conversations had dwindled to rare, short, and formal phone calls. Yet there was a sense that she always held a special place for me in her heart. This house was her life, and I, a mere guest returning for a short while. Dropping my bag onto the armchair, I heard her soft voice from behind the wall. Anna was speaking on the phone, her words barely audible, but something in her tone made me stop. The feeling was strange. It seemed I was hearing her voice for the first time, not as my stepmother's, but as a woman living her own private life. She spoke of the past, of how much had been missed, how time changes people. "No one stays the same," she said, with such sadness that I felt a pang of discomfort. I knew eavesdropping was wrong, yet her words stirred something within me I couldn't immediately identify. When I returned to the living room, Anna had finished her conversation and was standing by the window, lost in thought. She turned and met my gaze, her eyes full of gentleness and melancholy. We were both caught off guard, but neither of us pulled back. She smiled, and there was something inexplicably touching in that simple gesture, as though she had much to say but couldn't find the words. "I'm glad you're back," she said, her voice warm, but I caught a hint of sadness that struck a chord. "I'm glad too, Anna," I replied, trying to keep my voice light, though something tightened within me. We sat together in the old living room, talking about life, the past, and my plans for the future. It seemed like an ordinary conversation, yet there was an undercurrent of something unspoken. With each word, I felt my perception shifting, a fragile bond forming between us that had once been invisible. When the conversation turned to her thoughts of moving, I felt a slight sense of loss, and something else, something new, unknown, yet filling me to the brim. The next day, the house seemed as quiet and peaceful as ever, but everything had changed for me. Even the simple morning light filtering through the old shutters evoked an indescribable longing in my soul. Anna was outside, and as I saw her through the window, I realized I was discovering something new and unique in each of her movements. She was trimming the roses she had once planted with my father, smiling to herself, lost in thought. When I went outside to greet her, her face lit up with a soft smile as though she'd been waiting for this moment. We spoke of how quickly time passes, of the changes in life, and of the things we'd gained but could never keep. Her words were sincere but restrained, with something hidden behind them that she hesitated to reveal. Finally, after a long silence, she asked me, "Have you ever thought about what you'd change in your life?" I was stunned. It was strange to hear this question from her. I stood before Anna but saw her differently now. We were two people gazing into each other, as though for the first time free from familiar roles and masks. "Perhaps," I answered, searching for the right words. "Maybe I'd hold on to the moments that mattered, even when they didn't seem so important at the time." She looked at me in a way she never had before, her eyes glowing softly. We stood there, and I suddenly felt a warmth between us, filling the space imperceptibly. It was as if what we were seeking had always been here, hidden behind simple words. "Anna," I began, not knowing what I wanted to say. She was silent, watching me, and in that moment, words were unnecessary. Everything was said without them. I took a step closer without thinking, and she didn't pull back but simply closed her eyes. In the next moment, my lips brushed hers in a light, barely perceptible kiss. It felt like touching something forbidden yet utterly natural. Time stood still, and all I could feel was her breath, her warmth, the quiet beat of her heart. When we pulled away, her gaze was soft but held something unsaid. "I'm sorry," I said, lowering my gaze, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. She gently placed a hand on my shoulder, smiling as if to say everything was okay. "Sometimes, what we don't plan turns out to be the most important," she whispered. In those moments, I realized a bond had formed between us that couldn't simply be broken. We stood side by side, surrounded by the quiet of the garden, and each of us knew this moment would be a part of us forever. Evening arrived, and the house was once again wrapped in a soft, cozy silence. I sat in the old armchair by the fireplace, thinking about what had happened that morning. The kiss with Anna had left a mark on my soul that I couldn't erase. I tried to convince myself it was just a fleeting moment, a random impulse, but each time the feeling returned stronger. Through the dimness of the room, I heard her footsteps. Anna entered, pausing slightly at the door before coming closer and sitting on the edge of the chair opposite me. Her eyes mirrored the same hesitation I felt, as if we were both searching for the right words to express what was happening in our hearts. "It's been a tough day, hasn't it?" she asked, breaking the silence. I nodded, my gaze fixed on the fire. Words were on the tip of my tongue, but I was afraid to speak them. Anna seemed to understand, and she lowered her gaze, clasping her knees as if trying to guard against her own thoughts. "You know," she finally said, "we're in a situation that no one should ever be in." Her words were restrained, but I sensed that behind them lay a feeling deeper than mere caution. I slowly turned my head to meet her gaze, filled with tenderness and fear. We both knew we'd gone too far, but there was no turning back. "I know," I replied, "but sometimes things seem so simple, until they become complicated." She smiled, a sad smile. We sat in silence, aware that the silence conveyed far more than words ever could. Cautiously reached out, touching her fingers clasped on her knees. She didn't pull back. Her hands were warm and soft, as though asking not to be let go. In that moment, I felt I could trust her more than anyone else. Our souls had somehow drawn closer than ever before. As if reading my thoughts, she leaned towards me, her hair brushing against my face. The faint scent of her perfume made my heart race, but we continued to gaze at each other, unwilling to break the moment. "This is so wrong," she whispered, but she didn't withdraw her hands. I touched her cheek, and she shivered, but didn't avert her gaze. Our lips met again in a soft, barely felt kiss, filled with unspeakable tenderness and sadness. We both knew this moment wouldn't last forever, but perhaps that made it feel so real, infused with a truth no words could convey. That night, I sat by the fireplace long after she had gone. The warmth of her touch still lingered on my fingers, as though that brief moment had been preserved in the past, safe from the ravages of time or words. Several days passed since our encounter by the fireplace. Anna avoided me, and I understood her silence, but it left a sense of incompleteness that poisoned the air. On the evening before my departure, I decided to speak with her. This was my last chance to understand what that moment of silence meant to us, and to leave things in a way where nothing was left unsaid. I found her in the garden. In the darkening dusk, her figure seemed almost unreal, like a ghost dissolving in the evening air. She stood by the fountain, her head lowered, and I felt this place had become a symbol of something sacred for her. I approached, and she turned, her eyes reflecting the flickering light, full of uncertain expectation and a certain sadness. "You've decided to leave, haven't you?" she asked, making no effort to hide her feelings. I nodded, trying to find the words that might explain something. It all seemed impossible, as if we were trying to preserve something created solely for the two of us, but incapable of withstanding the light of day. "I don't want you to think this was a mistake," I began, feeling my heart ache. "Everything that happened was real." She lowered her head again, then took a step toward me, her hand resting on my shoulder. Her touch was gentle yet searing, and I realized that this moment would stay with me forever, regardless of how our final conversation turned out. "I know," she whispered, "but we have to let it go while we still can." Without thinking, I took her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she moved closer, and I felt her warm breath next to me. We stood on the very edge of the fountain, surrounded by silence, and I was certain that everything around us had disappeared. This was our world, our brief moment of infinity. Our lips met in a farewell kiss filled with love, sadness, and gratitude for everything we'd shared. This kiss wasn't hurried. It held no passion. It was a gentle, quiet touch of two people who knew they were parting forever. When we pulled away, I saw the same resolve in her eyes that I felt within myself. We both knew that no matter how strong our bond was, it wasn't meant to last. We preserved it there, in that kiss, in a moment that would forever remain ours. "Goodbye, Anna," I said, feeling my heart grow heavy. "I'll always remember this." She didn't respond, but her gaze held everything: regret, acceptance, and a quiet gratitude. With a slight nod, she let go of my hand and walked away slowly, fading into the shadows of the garden. I stood by the fountain, feeling the evening chill seep through my clothes. Now there was only silence between us,